So, theologically speaking,
hello and welcome to Theologically Speaking. I'm Kyle Leon Henderson.
and I'm Father Ian Elliott Davies.
How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you, today.
Yes, it's a warm day today and everybody's
Glorious.
out. We are coming up on the next great event in our church calendar. We've just had Ash Wednesday and we are now officially in Lent.
We're in the midst of Lent. Yep.
So just to have a little bit of a recap, we celebrated the time when we are anticipating Christ coming over the holidays. Then we went into, which is Advent, right? Am I getting it mixed up? It's Advent. And then when Christ comes, we celebrate the birth of Christ. And then we celebrate the Epiphany. And we've discussed that on the show. And then we sort of enter this period of what you said, a small period of ordinary time.
We drop into a little short period of ordinary time that used to be, in the olden days, labeled as Septuagesima, Sexagesima, Quinquagesima, and then Quadragesima is today.
And what is the I assume that the first half of that word is a number, and then Gesima is...
They're counting all the days back from Easter. So it's all in preparation. We're aiming at Easter and the sacred 3 days that lead up to Easter itself. Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday.
I think we usually go in order, but I think it would help to understand just a quick explanation of what is Lent.
Lent is from an Old English word that means spring, Lenten, and it's the whole idea that it's the springtime of the church, that it's this is the season where the buds start to bloom and things start to come alive.
And so, what is the purpose of Lent?
Lent is the 40 days that precedes Holy Week, and Holy Week is the time when we remember the Last Supper, the betrayal of Christ, the arrest of Christ, and the trial, and then obviously Christ going to the cross, and the stations of the cross on the way to the cross, and then the crucifixion, the death of Christ.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Lent, the time of Lent, the 40 days, is that to emulate the 40 days in the wilderness of Christ?
Yes, exactly, which was the reading we had, the gospel reading we had this morning in church, and which, of course, itself is a parallel of the 40 years that the Hebrews, the Jews, spent in the wilderness between leaving Egypt and arriving in the promised land.
So
the land flowing with milk and honey.
It would seem that the New Testament somewhat honors the Old Testament by re-examining and repurposing some symbolism.
Right. Oh, yes, there's enormous parallel between both testaments. And, of course, for Christians, it's the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. For Jews who do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah, then it's our Old Testament is their Bible, their entire scriptures.
And so now I want to know, what exactly is Ash Wednesday and what's it for?
Ash Wednesday is the day in which we take the palms from the previous year's Palm Sunday, we burn them, and as a sign of our penitence or our sorrow at our sins, because we're beginning Lent, which is a penitential season, we have a cross in the ashes formed on our foreheads, so that we're shriven. That's the technical verb, to be shriven, which is to be forgiven.
And so during this past week, we had Tuesday was Fat Tuesday, Mardi Gras.
Right.
Is that also a Christian holiday thing? Because when people think of Fat Tuesday and think of Mardi Gras, they think of New Orleans, which I will say, the first Mardi Gras in America was in Mobile, Alabama, not New Orleans,
Mobile,
Louisiana.
Alabama. And
That
is
was
it,
the
is it
first
Mobile or is it Mobile?
Mobile.
It's Mobile.
Mobile. And
Okay.
that was the first French city in America. But
Wow.
New Orleans came in and said, hold my beer, let me show you what I can do.
Right.
And they became bigger.
I bet.
So, but the first Mardi Gras was in Mobile, Alabama.
Uh,
However, continue. Tell me about
Shrove
Mardi Gras.
Tuesday or Fat Tuesday is to use up all of the sugar, the honey, the sweet things, the chocolate, the cakes, the biscuits, all the scrummy, yummy things that we had from Christmas onwards. Now we're about to enter a penitential season with Ash Wednesday, and so everything has to be eaten up on Fat Tuesday, Shrove Tuesday. I am given to understand, and you'll be able to tell me this, whether it's true or not, but they're very strict about Mardi Gras in New Orleans, that it's observed right up until midnight of the Wednesday morning.
I think that's correct. I've never been to Mardi Gras
right.
in New Orleans. It is on my bucket list. That would be really fun
Right.
to experience, because I want to experience everything in this great nation. But
Don't you have a New Orleans accent?
I do not. They have a little bit more of a saccharine. Have you ever seen the movie Steel Magnolias?
No.
That was in Louisiana. So watch that movie. It's hard to believe that you are a gay man in America who has not seen Steel Magnolias, but that's a whole different
And New
podcast.
Orleans is in Louisiana.
Yes, it is. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean that's always been my
Oh, the
tradition.
Louisiana Purchase.
Who did that?
The French.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson bought the Louisiana.
Yes.
Bought all this territory from
see,
the
I
French
do
for
know some
$15,000.
My knowledge is patchy. Very, very patchy.
Well, I'm gonna keep tapping the well for things you do know about. Then.
Right.
So, because I actually have a history degree, so I can tell you about the Louisiana Purchase. You'll tell me about Ash Wednesday.
The Mason-Dixon line.
There you go. Well, oh Lord. Now we're gonna detour right back to where we started.
Okay.
Because that's
Shrove Tuesday.
That's a hot topic.
Oh, is it?
But yeah, I mean, is there... Okay, so that does lead me, though, you talking about, New Orleans, Mardi
Right.
Gras. The tradition in New Orleans, I mean, is to gather the Mardi Gras beads and go wild and drink.
Right.
And I mean...
Have the beads.
Everybody knows what
and
you get a bead. How you get the
costume
more beads. You get the beads for celebrating and...
Oh, right. Right.
This is a church podcast, and that's as far as I'll
Yes.
go.
Celebrating the
part
beauty of the human
tradition?
form.
Right. Is that part of it?
No.
It's not. It's
That's
just for
not.
eating. We Americans
just-
have somewhat bastardized this.
Well,
this
I wouldn't use
holiday.
that verb. But I would say that we've adapted it for modern.
Much like we've adapted St.
Techno-
Patrick's Day as well.
Right.
Oh,
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. So there we are. So
And
Tuesday-
Christmas Day.
And Christmas Day as well.
And to a certain extent, Easter Day as well, I suppose.
It's all about hats, right?
And bunnies and things.
So the tradition is eat crazy on Shrove Tuesday.
Get everything out of the pantry.
The Episcopal Church has a tradition of, well, a lot of us do have a tradition of pancakes
Pancakes,
on Tuesday
yes.
evening.
Yeah.
And that's just something we haven't done in years because of COVID. But
Right.
I can't wait for a Shrove Tuesday pancake dinner
Yes.
again at some point. And then on Wednesday, it starts the penitence. And what are we emulating by that penitence with ourselves? Because that's something, I will say this, that's something that I've always really, really enjoyed is not the right word, but found a lot of inspiration in, because this starts a time when we are walking the same walk as Christ,
Yes.
is what it seems to me, as a newer
Right.
Episcopalian.
And as Christ went into the wilderness for 40 days and fasted for 40 days, So we begin our fast on Ash Wednesday. It's the first day that we go without sustenance. You're allowed to drink liquids, obviously, because that's important for our health. And if one is unwell, then one's allowed to eat as normal. But for the rest of us, then we should be at least fasting during daylight hours. That's one of my personal disciplines, is that on Ash Wednesday and then on Fridays in Lent as well.
And just before we move on into a little bit more about Lent, I want to stay with Ash Wednesday a bit too. We get a cross of ashes on our forehead, and the priest says, "Remember that from dust.
Remember that thou art dust, and unto dust thou shalt return."
And so that's a setting. It's almost a meditative
Yes.
prayer over to really set your mind for what our purpose is in Lent. Is that accurate to say?
Yes, it reminds us of our mortality and how frail and fragile we are.
And I think that's probably more evident now than it's ever been in any of our lifetimes.
Yes. Yeah.
Is there, because again, I fixate and am fascinated by throughout Lent and throughout Holy Week that's coming up that we'll be talking about. We are walking a symbolic walk with Christ and
Yes.
where Christ walked and doing what Christ did. Is there an Ash Wednesday moment? Is there something in Christ's life that happened in that way of a prayer reminding us of ashes to ashes?
No, not there. There's not a specific moment in Christ's life. It's the other way round. We are remembering Christ's going into the wilderness on Ash Wednesday. That's the day when we begin our Lenten journey. And of course it's then highlighted each Sunday in Lent. Now, technically speaking, Sundays, and some would even argue that Saturdays, are not part of the Lenten season. Hence, it goes Septuagesima, which is 70 days before Easter, Sexagesima, which is 60 days before Easter, Quinquagesima, 50 days, and then Quadragesima, today, 40 days before Easter. And that's excluding the Sundays, taking the Sundays out of the...
So it's hard math.
It's very hard
That's
math.
about six Sundays that are... So it's about 46 days.
Yeah, it's an approximation.
Okay.
It's just a rounding up of the numbers.
To me, it seems like it's just the prayer or the whole ceremonial Ash Wednesday.
Right, veiling the church.
Veiling the church. It seems like a simplification for our hearts and minds.
Right.
It's very simple.
Yes.
From dust you came, and to dust you will return.
Yes.
And it's because of Christ you will have salvation after death.
Right.
Plain and simple. Everything else is details, in a sense.
We will fade like the flower of the field or the grass of the field. That's what the Hebrew scriptures tell us, that we're as frail as any plant that can grow up in a day and can wither and just fade away. But in fact, we believe, even though that happens to us physically, that spiritually, our spirit, our soul endures, and it endures in Christ, in the life and resurrection of Christ. Because we look to the resurrection not just as a past event from 2,000 years ago, but we look to the resurrection as an event that is yet to happen as well to us.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So all of that is tied in with this observation of Holy Week and Lent and Easter.
And I've always heard, like, when my traditions growing up, we never did Lent, we never did fasting, we never did
Right.
any of that. It was, and again, in a sense, we do it here in this church too. But even Easter, the tradition I came from, Easter was not a day set apart, because
Right.
every Sunday was an Easter celebration in my church, or my church, in the church I grew up in. And so I grew up and I knew some people, like some Methodists and Lutherans and people who did observe Lent. And they would say, "What are you giving up for Lent? What are you giving up for Lent?" And now that I'm in this tradition, I know that there is a personal fasting during Lent that we do. What is the exact point of fasting through Lent?
To focus one's mind, to actually say, I'm not going to just have my normal, 2 mugs of coffee in the morning and my normal kind of fast food lunch or whatever, but I'm going to go for a day, so long as one is healthy. I'm going to go for a day without food. I'm going to take something on instead of eating fast food and having 2 mugs of coffee. Maybe I'll read an extra psalm in the morning, or I'll read from the Bible, or I'll read some other work of importance.
And would it be accurate to say that the fasting is is designed to be an interruption in our life?
Deliberately so.
And then it gives you that opportunity to focus on it. Why am I doing this? And it takes your mind back to the plight of Christ in the last days of his life. I will say, I took, from 2016, when I started coming to the Episcopal Church, I took Lent very seriously. I do not cancel my fast on Sundays. I fast. I always took it seriously. If I gave up, one year I gave up meat and my partner made a tomato pie, which was terrible. But I stuck to it. It was mostly tomatoes and mayonnaise, and it was just not amazing.
It doesn't sound good.
I choked it down, but there was no meat.
Right.
Right. But I took it very seriously. And then and I will say it was a little bit older. Some people more older than 50 years old, I will say. Mm-hmm. I would say, "What are you giving up for Lent?" And they would say, "Nothing." And so how serious is the fast for our penitence and for our mindfulness?
Well, it's a sign and a symbol of concentrating and being sorry for our misdeeds, for our sins, for the things that we've got wrong in life. But also, it gives us the opportunity to do something different from our usual run-of-the-mill. We meander along, flicking through the television channels or spending endless hours on social media, when we could, in fact, be engaging in a conversation with, a relative or a friend, and actually having a face-to-face conversation with someone. I mean, these days, fasting need not necessarily mean just meat or dairy product or sugar or chocolate, but we could be fasting from, say, Facebook for 40 days and 40 nights. That would be very interesting.
My friend who I talk about at times, who is Episcopalian, and she introduced me to the Episcopal Church. She gave up television one year. It was our senior year in college, and it made things very difficult to talk about RuPaul's Drag Race, but she did it.
Right.
So
she did.
And my thoughts are this, because there are people that would say, "I'm not giving up anything for Lent this year. I'm not doing that this year." And in my head, I'm trying to suss it out. I'm trying to really place it where its importance is. And we know that a sin is a sin is a sin. So if you have a transgression outside of your marriage, for instance, that's a sin that you have to pray and atone for. Or if you yell profanities at someone in traffic, that's a sin you have to atone for. If you take on a fast and then you break your fast, is that a sin like any other sin, or is it just...
It's not a sin in the sense of one has actually inflicted harm on someone else, but one has let oneself down, really. You know, if one promises to oneself, I'm not going to eat meat, or I'm going to give up dairy products for Lent, then the only person that we're really hurting, apart from the animals, of course, and there's a big question there about vegetarianism and veganism and all of those wonderful permutations of eating different things. The person that we're hurting most of all is ourselves. We're letting ourselves down.
So it's more when you break your fast or you decide not to fast, for instance. It's more of a signpost to let you know that you could do better. Here's your opportunity. Everyone falters, but you can start today and refocus your brain and refocus your heart.
Yes, and I mean, some people live with addictions, and their 12 steps enable them to cope with their addictions. And addictions can take any shape or form, of any kind of size or shape or form that you can think of, whether it be alcohol or drugs or a particular behavior like shopping endlessly on Amazon or food. And people learn, we learn how to cope with our addictions by either cutting things out entirely or minimizing their impact on our lives.
I think I always also, and I don't know, this is a bonus because fasting for me does get my mind right for Holy Week. And Holy Week, we'll go into it more in another episode as we get closer, but Holy Week is the saddest, most emotionally draining week of the year for Christian people.
Yeah.
Because you're walking the walk, and when you get to Good Friday, when the entire Mass is designed to bring your brain to that walk to Mount Calvary.
Yes.
It's hollowing. I've never been to a Good Friday service where everyone was not weeping, because that's what this whole thing is starting. And so that is what the purpose is. But for me, it also allows me to see that nothing is necessary. We need food, but we don't need meat. We need food, but we don't need sugar.
Right.
We need water, but we don't need coffee. Right. Everything is deletable when you're walking through Christ. You have to have bread and water to eat and live, but nothing is necessary. I say it. Everybody says, I got to have my coffee in the morning, or, I just have to have a donut after dinner. No, you don't. Lent teaches us that you have what you need without all the fluff.
One of the temptations that Christ faces in the wilderness is that very temptation. He's starving, he's hungry, and Satan, the adversary, says to him, you see these stones? You could turn these stones into loaves of bread and eat. And Christ's rejoinder to Satan is, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Now, that is a hugely complicated parable and saying, but it's saying something along the lines that you've just been saying. We've got all of these things in the world that we've crammed into our existence, and we don't need half of the things that we surround ourselves with.
And do you find this because you are probably someone who has discipline as part of your job description in a sense, and do you find that you do that too? Coming out of Lent, you have a different relationship with the thing that you gave up for Lent, or the thing that you took on for Lent.
Yes, it's a more focused, I'm more present to whatever I turn my attention to than normal.
Like for the year I gave up meat for Lent.
Right.
That after Good Friday, I was able to eat meat again.
Right.
And I found I didn't want to.
You didn't want to?
I found that I wanted to, like,
Right.
I don't know. I just, it was almost. I mean, this might be a little bit inappropriate comparison, but almost like someone who is addicted to a
Right.
substance. I was
Yes.
like, I don't want to let you back in yet. I don't want to. It's more interesting to see what you can do around the parameters of that thing you gave up.
Right.
In the end, because you do gain this discipline during Lent, right? And it's almost like, for me, it was almost like a flexing. Now that I've given up meat for 40 days, let me show you how I'm in control.
Right.
Through Christ, I'm in control of this now.
Right.
I can, meditate my way through what
The meat
in a more
doesn't control
purposeful-
you anymore.
Yeah, in a more
It's-
purposeful existence at the end of that is what it felt like. Is that
That's-
accurate? And is that sort of
that's-
the purpose?
That's fantastic. I think that that's a really, really good outcome to come to that realization.
And I guess there are other people who have the opposite outcome, who gave up ice cream and then go to Haagen-Dazs and get 12 dozen
Right, and-
cartons and then eat them all over the weekend of Easter.
And then they're sick, of
And
course.
and then they're sick from the bunnies at Easter or
Yeah.
whatever. But
Yeah, but everything in moderation, and sometimes the moderation means that we have to cut things out completely.
should we be doing anything besides fasting through Lent?
Yes, we should be taking on things that are spiritually good for our spiritual physique, as it were, exercising muscles that we don't normally exercise, spiritually praying, taking time to meditate, taking time to be present in a moment, taking time to actually appreciate the incredible privilege and beauty that is all around us. In spite of COVID-19, in spite of all the harsh reality, there is so much goodness that's also around us all the time. And that's a very sobering realization. And I think that that's very helpful for those of us who are in Lent at the moment. We're feeling pretty much, well, we've had to be in Lent since the beginning of the coronavirus. So for goodness sake.
Well, and that's so fascinating that we all know now that March 15th was essentially the date that America turned the lights off for a while.
Right.
We've been, and over the course of this last year, we've been coming back and forth. Things are open. Sometimes your favorite restaurant is wide open and go eat, and sometimes you'll go and it's boarded up. Who knows? But that was the day, and it was during Lent that it all shut down, and that felt so devastating. It felt so devastating that we weren't going to get to have Easter, because that's the big celebration. That's the payoff. That especially in this church, and I don't know about the Catholic Church and Methodist Church and Lutheran Church, who do follow these traditions. Easter Vigil is the most beautiful celebration of any of it, and we got that taken away. And some Episcopalians felt some type of way about that last year, and rightfully so. I mean, it was uncharted territory.
Yeah.
And this year it doesn't really feel like uncharted territory. Like, I feel like we've gotten stronger, don't you? That if we don't get Easter, we don't get Easter, and we have Easter in our heart. We know what today is.
Yes, but there's a significant element. Remember when you said that every Sunday was an Easter Sunday? That's true. That's absolutely right. But there has to be contrast somewhere. And I
totally agree.
There have to be some Sundays when, for example, in the Advent season, we're thinking about the birth of Christ, the coming of Christ as a child. And then equally in Lent, we're looking towards Calvary and the sacrifice that Christ makes on our behalf on the cross. So that contrast, that being able to see the nuance and the subtlety of the differences in the Sundays is important. So there are no flowers in church at the moment, for example, because we don't have flowers in church during Lent at all, apart from Laetare Sunday, but that's a whole other.
Is there, as we're getting ready to wrap up this portion of the discussion, is there anything that you, as the disciplined head of the spiritual head of the church, is there anything you can give me and the listeners something to focus on during Lent? Not just the not having and not just the prayer, because as Christians, you always pray. You don't just pray during Lent, but is there something more we can be focused on during Lent? And also, is there anything that we can focus on as we come out of Lent?
Yes, I think the important thing for us this year is to prepare for what the new reality will be. Getting ready is going to be the flavour of the season, I think, rather than being penitential and down and depressed and feeling dull and lonely and oppressed. Being prepared to celebrate, because I really hope that once we can be back together, once we can be with one another again physically in close proximity, that we will appreciate what we've been missing for a year. And I hope that we will appreciate that, the embodiment of the Christian faith in one another.
And that makes me very emotional to think about it in those terms, because I'm helping. One of my day jobs is to help vaccinate Los Angeles, and it does feel like something's on the cusp. And in the Christian history, after Christ is risen, then we go out and we spread the word by the power of our example.
Right.
And it's looking like here in 2021, sometime after Easter, we're going to be out and about again. And this is an opportunity to really focus on who we want to be when we go out there.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Thank you for that notion.
No, thank you.
Is there any poems or inspirations that we can take? I mean, this whole conversation has just been an inspiration to get through Lent, I guess.
I haven't chosen any poems at all.
Because this is a little bit of a somber time. It's a little bit of a quiet, somber, meditative time. So yeah. I
can't think of a poem off the top of my head other than Christopher Smart's Jubilate Anno, which is a long, long poem.
Okay, so we'll say that again slowly.
Christopher Smart,
who
was a clergyman,
okay,
in the 18th century in Britain. He spent time in a lunatic asylum because he understood reality in, let's say, in a slightly different form than other people. And he wrote a beautiful poem called Jubilate Anno, or
Jubilate Anno.
Which in English is Rejoice in the Lamb. And Benjamin Britten, the British composer, Benjamin Britten, set it to music, and it's a remarkable.
So there's our first bit of homework for our listeners, because you didn't bring the poem and you said it's extremely long. So for as far as poems go, so Christopher Smart, Jubilante Anno,
or Rejoice in the Lamb.
Rejoice in the Lamb. Go look it up and
look for a recording of Rejoice in the Lamb.
Well, all right. Well, thank you for this time, Father.
Thank you.
Theologically Speaking is a production of Church Nerds Productions. Executive producers for the show are Jeffrey Clark Tosca, Father Ian Elliott Davis, and Kyle Leon Henderson. Associate producer is Ed Tosca. Editors for the show are Kyle Leon Henderson and Jeffrey Clark Tosca. Music for this program is provided by Dr. Jeffrey Parola and the choir at St. Thomas the Apostle Hollywood. We would also like to give a special thanks to Louie for all the loving licks on the knee under the table while we produce this show. Visit St. Thomas the Apostle Hollywood Facebook page for more information on the show, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram at St. Thomas Hollywood.